It's been 50 years since solar was invented. 50 years of work to get it on the White House, 50 years of work to get it on your house. Today, I want to share with you a conversation with Abby Hopper, the current president of SEIA, and three legends who had a hand in creating and ushering in the new era of solar through SEIA: Fred Morse, Scott Sklar, and Rhone Resch. This conversation was a part of the SEIA Forum in celebration of the 50th anniversary. And we have an exclusive with Suncast to record and bring it to you. I hope that you enjoy.
In 1971, somebody got President Nixon to ask, does solar energy make sense for America? I was teaching at the University of Maryland. I got the honor to put a panel of experts together. I had to raid the Flat Earth Society to find people who knew about solar energy. And we ended up writing a report to the White House in 1972. That started my career. I then went to NSF. I wrote some of the first fundamental research contracts in photovoltaics. In fact, I have the list with me. The fellow who started SolarX, Lindmeyer? Yeah, the very first contracts. I then went to IRTA. I then went to DOE. Sam Taylor was there with me, and was lucky enough to get involved in shaping the program. We built it up under Carter, and I tried my best to stop Reagan from destroying it, which he succeeded primarily. In 2007, I joined the Spanish company Abengoa, and we built two big concentrating solar thermal plants. So that's my self-introduction. I can, at some point, you want me to talk a little bit about the start of SEIA?
Yeah.
Should I do it now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I'm an old guy, so I wrote this down so I don't forget.
Well, we don't have 2 hours, Fred. So
I know.
Keep it succinct.
So when did life begin on this planet? Is that a good starting point?
You are unbelievable.
Okay.
For a guy without hair, unbelievable.
So SEIA started because of external events. In the period before and after SEIA, 1973, first oil crisis. 1967, first natural gas curtailment. A year later, natural gas curtailment. 2 years later, the second oil embargo, and Chernobyl went. So transportation fuel, heating fuel for homes, energy. The voters were angry, and they made their concerns known. We had four administrations: Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan in that time, and a very active Congress. They passed, and I'm going to look at this. The Federal Energy Agency was formed. Next year later, listen to this: Non-Nuclear Energy Act. Non-nuclear, that means us. Solar Heating and Cooling Demonstration Act. Energy Conservation Act. IRTA was formed. DOE was formed. SERI was formed. PERPA, you guys still love PERPA. PERPA was formed. So there was a lot going on, and that was the soup in which SEIA was formed. It was born, there was a multi-client study by Arthur D. Little right after the first oil crisis. And the companies, mainly Solar Heating and Cooling, decided they needed a forum. The fellow over there, Sam Taylor, and another guy, James Ince, figured out that the best thing would be to form a trade association, and in the spring of '74, SEIA was born. Some kids are born with a golden spoon in their mouth. SEIA was born with a testimony in its hand. Before SEIA started, the chairman, Sheldon Butt, was up on the Hill testifying for what? Solar tax credit.
Yeah.
The history of SEIA, things never change. But I want you guys to know, the first decade, the board was chaired by solar heating and cooling people. It was only in year 13 that a concentrating solar thermal person took over. And finally, in year 15, Jim Caldwell, photovoltaics, took over as chair of the board. And from then on, the PV industry has been very, very prevalent. And I think I just want to end with a quote, because the president's always asked, does the country have enough stuff, enough steel, coal, so on? And so the White House asked Dixie Lee Ray, who, if you ever want to have fun, Google Dixie Lee Ray and ask for her quotes. They're really great. And I'm going to tell you one of them. She was told to write a report on the energy resources of America, coal, oil, gas, and to focus on the two newbies, nuclear and solar. And in a testimony, she was asked, are you including solar in your report? And she said, I'm quoting, she said, solar energy is a pimple on the backside of the nuclear elephant. Okay? And let me say now, the pimple and the elephant have changed places.
Scott, how are you going to follow that?
During that same era, I started working for Senator Javits of New York as a military aide in 1970. The oil embargo came in. They didn't have energy staff really on the Hill. They had some committee stuff on Interior, some stuff on the regulatory side, but not really anything. There were gunfights in New York. I was from the center of New York on gasoline lines that were 3 hours long, and the senator was on a gasoline line for an hour and a half and goes to their chief of staff and says, who does energy on our staff? Chief of staff says, we don't have one. He goes, have Sklar come and meet me in my Capitol office. So I go in. Guy has no sense of humor, calls me in, doesn't even look up at me and says, you know, all those military people the White House are talking to about the energy embargo? I go, yeah. He goes, you're my energy aide. And I just stand there. And I go to the light switch, and I flip it on and off because it's not looking at me. And he looks up, crinkles his eyebrows. I go, Senator, I know where this stuff comes from. He goes, my son, you'll learn. Get out of it. So I did. And this was the epiphany I had, knowing nothing, was that the lobbyists that came up immediately after I was announced, as was happening all over the Capitol Hill, from the utility industry, the oil industry, the auto industry, knew nothing about energy in reality. Nothing. They knew a little sliver about what they knew, but nothing in reality. So I, working for a very powerful senator, started to assemble people at universities and local government officials, and we created the first, it was called Solar Coalition, and solar back then meant all renewables, on the Hill, bipartisan. Bipartisan, really bipartisan, which a lot of the legislation that Fred talked about came out of that effort of this bipartisan legislation. But I have to tell you this 30-second story. I get called in, Senator Bennett Johnston, Louisiana, head of the Energy Committee, head of the Appropriations Subcommittee, Democrat, conservative, oil and gas guy, liked nuclear, didn't like any of this new stuff, thought it was silly. His chief of staff, 35 years my senior, everybody's scared of him. I'm coming in and telling him what I want in appropriations from a very powerful senator. And I knew he had to do it, even if he didn't like me or liked what I wanted. And he's smiling at me the whole time. And he stands up, and he asks me to stand up. And he puts his hand on my shoulders. Now, I'm in my late 20s. He's in his 50s. And everybody's scared of this guy. He goes, I just want to tell you, and I'm being very sincere, I really like you. Seriously. And I love your enthusiasm. And I will do most of what you're asking me. But as a friend, and I'm serious as a friend, there will never be farms and farms of wind turbines and acres of solar panels. Never. It's a pipe dream. And then he says to me, and I go, but Proctor, he goes, no, listen to me. He goes, the entire renewable energy is 280 million, of which 270 million is hydropower. And all this other stuff you're talking about is 40 to 50 times more expensive than oil and gas. And it's just, and you're just never going to, with this $200 million, compete against a $15 trillion industry. It's ridiculous. But I'm going to do what you want anyway. So that's where we're starting. So I left to work for the environmental community and some of the research community, and then joined SEIA. And so we're talking 2015. 2015. 1984, I joined, and as the political director, and then a year and a half later became the executive director. So we were tiny staff. We were totally, pretty much The heads of SEIA, the founders that we talked about here, were lobbying me on Capitol Hill. So I knew, it was Olin Brass, it was PPG Glass. These are the people that were going to have the future in our industry. It was Arco Solar Division, and then SolarX is our first real manufacturer here. McDonnell Douglas, because they got DOE money, military for high temperature. And then FAFCO, the largest solar water heating company in the United States that made pool heating, which was the only economic real kind of solar at the time. That was sort of the crew that would lobby me all the time. And so now I joined SEIA. My job as a political director was to set up the chapter network. Now, Cal-SEIA did exist. FLO-SEIA was evolving. But my job was to create chapters, to create a base of operations, and then to create I worked on the Hill, a good lobbying team. And we were actually tiny but very effective, but survived for people like Fred Morse and others at DOE doing research studies. But also I opened it up to USAID and EPA to get money in to help us survive. And so that was, I think, my biggest contribution around. And I just want to point out that, again, as Fred mentioned, we were only a solar water heating industry in reality. PV was space, intelligence stuff. And so it was an amazing effort to get real attention on a dream. And remember, all of you sitting here, it was all based on a dream. And that we made the dream. So thank you all very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Rhone Resch. Abby, thank you for having me here today. It's hard to follow these two guys, obviously. My history doesn't go back that far, nor does my memory, for that matter. But I do have the hair and no beard. But I'll give you my 30-second how I got to SEIA and then maybe the first couple of years there, because it's semi-interesting. So I came down to D.C. Right after grad school, working for the Clinton administration at the Environmental Protection Agency. My sole focus coming out of grad school, environmental engineer, was focused on climate change. And these were brand new programs under Clinton to try to address climate, but not through a regulatory action, but through voluntary actions, working with industry to create business models that would reduce carbon emissions and, in some case, methane emissions and all the rest. So we created the Energy Star program at EPA, which everybody knows you can't buy or wash your dryer without it, and energy green lights, and so many of these other programs, which are fantastic. And I was working with the natural gas or the energy community broadly. And so when I left the EPA, I went to work with the natural gas industry, actually for a trade association, because they were committed to being the transition fuel from coal to something else. And for me, it was clear it was going to be renewables at some point in time, but as Scott pointed out, there really wasn't much going on per se in really energy and electricity generation from the power sector at that point. So I worked with the Natural Gas Supply Association, and again, trying to promote 4P legislation. Remember that, Scott? 4P, the fourth P, of course, being carbon as a pollutant. And so really getting the industry to embrace that. But it became clear during that time period that we needed a technology advancement, right? Natural gas was only going to get us so far. We needed to very rapidly move to renewables. And so I worked at NGSA for a couple of years and really learned carefully how that industry got things done. Right? I mean, got the roadmap, and specifically, how does oil and gas get stuff done in Washington? Who are the power players? How do you influence them? How do you make cogent arguments that are saleable on the Hill? And so I applied for the SEIA job, and I didn't get it. Remember that? You hired Glenn Hammer? Yep. And so
just to interrupt, because we were being attacked by Republicans, and Glenn worked from a Republican House member.
Yep.
And so, but then we came to our senses.
Took a little while, but then they came to their senses. They hired me. And I came on board in 2004. We had a record year for solar, for PV, that year. We installed 52 megawatts in 2004. Record year. We were excited. It was up probably 40% from the previous year. Everybody was really thrilled. And we actually had an energy bill that was going at that point in time. Yeah. And I sat down with the leaders. Fred, you were one of them, and John Miles was there, and Tom Lydon, and a whole bunch of others. And we sat around a room, and we're like, okay, we're asking for a 10% residential tax credit. That's our ask. I'm like, is that going to change anything? Because we had the permanent 10% commercial tax credit. And everyone's like, no. And I looked at John Miles, and I'm like, are you going to be able to build your 52 megawatt CSP plant in Nevada with a 10% tax credit? And he said, no. So we said, all right, well, what's going to make a difference? How about 15%? And he's like, no. I mean, we don't have a McKinsey study behind us, right? We're not spending money to try to do this analysis. We're going around the table. And I'm like, 20%.
Was it over liquor?
No, it wasn't even over liquor. I mean, exactly. That's how we actually reached the resolution. So at 20%, 25%. And finally we said, come on, John, 30%? Could you build your CSP plant with 30%? He said, yes. If we get a 30% tax credit, we can build this CSP plant. I'm like, oh, fantastic. Great. We have progress. I'm like, Tom, what could you do with the 30%? He's like, yeah, we're doing rooftop solar out in California. Absolutely. And went around the room, and everybody said 30% tax credit would be fantastic. So boom, all of a sudden we had something to focus on as an industry, right? And so we were unified, and I don't know if there was anybody residential at that time, but we said, all right, we have to have a residential tax credit as well. So we'll do both of them at the same time. And we pushed it forward, and sure enough, we got it passed. And interestingly enough, it ended up being the 2005 energy bill, the score for the solar tax credits was $52 million. 52. And if we were below 50 million, it would have been an asterisk. And so they had to give us just a little bit more. So we came in at 52 million. And that created, that created the ITC, which was fun, and obviously the foundation for so much that came from there. So I stayed here for 12 years, loved it. So many of the people who currently work for SEIA or work in the industry, I'm thrilled to see they all stayed in solar, were people we hired in the early days, Catherine and Scott and Manning and, of course, Justin and so many others. I'm thrilled that they've continued to work and made such incredible contributions to the industry. So I'm very proud of both what SEIA did at that time and where it is today, and how many people have really created careers and made a huge impact on this industry coming out of SEIA. Thanks.
Wow. So in about 12 minutes, we heard about the formation of SEIA, so the initial funding and structure of how SEIA got out of its infancy and into a real organization, and the creation of the ITC. That's pretty amazing. Well done, gentlemen.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Who would have looked at these photos and thought that is what happened? All right, let's talk about SEIA as an organization a little bit. Fred, if you were going to say, you were here at the very beginning. You were on the board when I was hired. We were just talking this morning. Every single board member interviewed me when I applied for this job. I don't know if you had that pleasure, Rhone, but every single one interviewed me. And so Fred and I met at a coffee shop in Bethesda.
Le Pan Quotidien.
Yes, what he said. But so you've seen it sort of over the years. What is the biggest change in terms of the organization since the founding?
I think it went from small to large, a tiny staff. You heard Scott talking about it. The staff now is impressive. It went from just 3 units or divisions. It had a suppliers division or council where the people who made the hardware and the components wanted to talk together. It had a utility council in those days, and it had a chapters council. And now you have, I looked at the map on the website of divisions and committees and working groups. It's incredible how you have expanded to meet the needs of the industry. And you went from solar, hot water, and space heating, then to concentrating solar thermal, then to PV, and now pretty much PV plus storage. And so that's the evolution that I see.
Well, for me, I came in at a time when SEIA went from a multi-management firm that ran SEIA to a full dedicated staff. And they had picked somebody who was an association manager, knew nothing about energy. And then they really brought me in because I knew energy. And he didn't work out so well, so they made me executive director. But the issue was, at the time, remember, we had the solar water heating industry that was economic, was 90% of the membership. And frankly, they thought the PV stuff and the high temperature stuff was nutty. The high-temperature industry that was forming were giant companies mostly. And they thought, or they weren't giant companies, but they were run by people from giant companies. They had a very different view, and of course they needed a lot more capital, and they were not really economic yet. And they thought all this water heating stuff was ridiculous. I mean, it was okay, but not really going to happen. And then you had these PV people, fostered by DOE and others, that NASA and others, that were in space and in intelligence and starting to get remote, but they were like teeny players. And my job was really to make sure they didn't chew their heads off at each other. That we were, I would say this coming from Capitol Hill, this industry is like a little ant, and you want to grow into a cockroach. So trying to eat each other up and impugn each other makes no sense. And they would look at me and say, you don't know what you're talking about. My little thing is going to be giant, and all these other ones are going to be nothing. They're going to be on the side. So how to get SEIA rowing in the same direction was a huge issue all the time. And they were all scrappy and all opinionated. And then I just want to move to get to Rhone's tenure for a second. So his predecessor lasted for 2 years and resigned. And I get a call. I have my own company, right? I left SEIA. I'm still 24 years old, my company, owner's rep company on renewables. And I get a call from the chair of the board saying, you got to come back. I go, it's been 2 years. What do you mean I got to come back? He goes, well, the guy resigned. We don't know what to do. So I go, well, I'll find you a new guy. And so, at any rate, so I basically headed up. I was there for 8 months, back as head of SEIA, running my company. And I had told Rhone when we didn't select him that the only issue why we didn't really pick him is he didn't have enough Hill experience. And so he spent time at his gas industry association getting that experience. And he came back and interviewed and threw all of that out. And I was able to say, this is our guy. Even though he doesn't have a beard, I think he's okay. I think he's good. I said that true about Abby, too. So, any rate, so that was a real transformative thing that what made his tenure, they trust that he would be able to guide. And the other thing I saw, which originally saw in him, was he was at a real trade association. Real energy trade association. And we needed that sophistication, as with Abby, with her regulatory background, the same thing. How SEIA had to grow was bring in these different expertise in the real world to make it mature. So that's what we got when really wrong. So now to you, my brother.
Thank you, Scott. All of that's true, by the way. I know Scott sometimes tells some great stories, but all of what he just said was true. Yeah, so I joined, as I mentioned, in 2004. We were at the Grange building, which I don't know if it had air conditioning. Certainly didn't feel like it.
No.
The bathroom was 2 stories away, so as was the coffee pot.
On top of the building.
The coffee pot was two stories down, and the bathroom was 2 stories up, or vice versa. Anyway, it was a little bit of a rough environment. We had 3 employees. We had Noah Kay, Emily Brown, and Colin Murchie. Many of you probably know Colin, and Noah, of course, is still in the space from an investment banking perspective up in New York. And we had a structure that was very much what you said. It was solar water heating, PV, and concentrating solar, and then we had a state liaison. And very quickly we organized around some of the key issues that the industry was facing. So the first was obviously, let's get something in this energy bill. And so a big part of our strategy at that point was to be part of a coalition in Washington. Nobody's going to listen to just little solar and SEIA per se. So we were part of a broader energy coalition. I don't know if you remember this, but they used to say all of the above, right? We need all of the above. And my argument was, well, that's great. We love all of the above, but you're not including solar. So, include us. And sure enough, and at the table were some fairly unsavory characters. It's kind of like, have you ever seen the movie Thank You for Smoking? Where you're hanging out with some unsavory characters. So, coal is there, and oil and gas are there, and nukes, and, the Edison Electric Institute was there, and just kidding. And, but we were there at the table. We were the only renewable ones at the table, right? So once we got that done, we then had the ability to say, okay, how are we going to implement this now? How are we going to sell this? So we created additional committees focused on the implementation, one of which was to work with Wall Street, was to make sure that we were bankable as a technology, to get them convinced that solar was something they could invest in. Working with people like John Eber, on the tax credit. He hated the ITC. He loved the PTC. And he's like, no, Rhone, you need a PTC. That's another story. But the answer is no, we got the ITC. So getting the investors to actually invest through the tax credit became critical. And as Scott pointed out, which was so important, we had real infights within the organization itself across technology. Everybody wanted their piece of the pie.
Yep.
And that was the beauty of it.
And didn't like the other one.
And didn't. Exactly. All of a sudden they're jealous. Oh, PV's getting all the attention now, or Resi's getting all the attention. And but that was the beauty of the 30% ITC, is that everybody could use it, right? And you just had to be creative on how you were going to apply it. So it went across all of the different companies. And as we were creating committees and engagement, it was focused specifically on the topics that each of those segments needed. We started to create an association that spoke with one voice consistently, just exactly what Scott is saying, right? Is you're corralling the cats, but when we're on the Hill or when we're in the media or when we're talking to Wall Street or whatever it happens to be, we are speaking with one voice. And that, I think that kind of unification really allowed us, we had grievances, but we'd share them, at board meetings, we'd share them in committee meetings, we'd share them, hopefully not publicly, but sometimes. And then we create, again, working groups or committees to address it. So by the time I left, I think we had 12 committees and over 20 different working groups on everything from, obviously trade, but we created RE+, which was SP, originally Solar Power, and then Solar Power International in 2004, which became, again, a great unifier for the industry as well. So, that's kind of the structure we found. Oh, one other thing. I forgot this. When I started, our budget was $350,000. So we had three people. We had $350,000 budget. Glenn, who was the previous executive director, left, and he created a group called Americans for Solar Power, ASPV, in Arizona. And he took 3 of my board members. I only had 8 board members who were paying board members, and he took 3 of them, BP, Sanyo, and First Solar.
Right.
And then eventually Kyocera went too. And so now all of a sudden our 350 budget went down to, 175 or 200, something like that. And then we had to scramble and kind of exist in that environment. So it was super tight for a long, long time. Our first projector, we had it for about 2.5 years. We got it on loan from, this is like a projector, like you want to show a PowerPoint up on the wall. we couldn't afford one. So we got one from NREL. And we were always advocating for NREL's budget, and they were super supportive. They're like, okay, you can, don't tell anybody, but you can have this on loan. And I'm like, oh my God, a projector.
Be in jail now. Yeah.
A projector. So we had this projector for about 2.5 years. I'll never forget when Larry Kazmersky called me up and he's like, hey dude, can we get our projector back? I'm like, what? He's like, you can afford one now. I mean, you've got this RE Plus thing going. So it was kind of funny, just in the sense of the little pieces. And we always sublet. We moved around from space to space as we continued to grow in order to kind of keep things in check. So super fun days, but it really was trying to be responsive to the solar industry, the needs, and anticipating what we needed to do to grow this industry overall.
Abby,
yes.
I have one 30-second thing.
All right, you're on the clock.
In my tenure, just as the problem we had internally, all renewables were facing the same thing. So I tried to get the renewable trade groups, who all lobbied me, their founders, when I was working on Capitol Hill, to rent space together and to work together. And the same thing, the other renewables hated each other. They didn't love each other. They hated each other. And the goal, I would take them to breakfast once a week and try to create love. And of course and have a coalition, and we created the Sustainable Energy Coalition with all the environmental groups so we could roll in the direction so we're part of a bigger family with the same message and respect. Okay, I'm done.
Excellent. The thing that has impressed me the most that you've said so far is each of you said it in a different way. You created something out of nothing. You had a dream, and you made it so. A trade association, an organization, an ITC, right? It's amazing. And so as we think about how do you both how do you do that, right? What would you say to the people in this room that are where we are now in the industry? What advice would you have for how to create something? And secondly, and similarly, we always talk about champions. We need more champions. We need more champions on the Hill. We need more champions out in the atmosphere. You clearly were able to do that because you accomplished so much. What advice would you have there? Fred, do you want to start?
I'll keep it quite short. I think Scott and Rhone could hit that one out of the park. What I remember SEIA did early on is they had Solar Person of the Year Award starting in 76. And that was very, very effective. Yes. They also, SEIA would understand the political, whether it's a governor or a state official, representative, what were they concerned about? Was it environment, economy, availability? And they made the compelling case that solar can answer your particular need. And they went to fundraisers. And I remember going to a Harry Reid fundraiser, and he looked at, I think Rhone was there, and he looked at us and he says, "You solar guys are amazing. You come to play baseball every year. You come to the plate, you get clobbered by oil and gas, and you come year after year, you come back." And I think that's what SEIA did, came year after year and changed things.
I want to go on Abby's theme, how she finished her presentation before us. In my belief, this was a personal journey. And so I know you're all in this because it's sort of a personal journey. For me, when I left SEIA, I decided that I do a lot of public speaking all the time, and on a lot of panels all over the world, in fact. And I decided I wasn't going to speak at environmental conferences at all, maybe once a year. They already know our message. I want to talk to agriculture. I want to talk to finance. I want to talk to military. I do a lot of work in military. I want to talk to international affairs. And now resiliency is my big thing. And so I go all over the world being asked to talk on these things of how our issue impacts positively your world. The other professional journey I did was 15 years ago. I began teaching at George Washington University. I now teach 3 different interdisciplinary courses at GW while running my 24-year-old, very active global owners rep company on renewables. And the journey of being able to teach really smart young people or people leaving the military or another portion of life to come back into education about this vision and what we do is probably the most rewarding thing in my entire life, because they want to go in this direction. They intuitively understand what all of us understand right now, but we need to give them the skills. And they have all different skills. They're into software, they're into cybersecurity, they're into financial management, they're into emergency preparedness, land use planning, emissions reductions, all these things of life. So I'm asking you all, aside from thanking you for being in this journey, to step out of your comfort zone and start talking to people, to young people, to people in different disciplines who you wouldn't expect. Because what you do individually has this sort of crescendo effect, this bounce. And I know it's hard because we're all working, we all have families, you want some playtime too. I understand all of that. But that is what I'm asking you to do, because that's how we win. And the message is right. You know that. So thank you.
So I'll pick up on one word that Scott said, which I think is critical for us as an industry, us as individual workers in this fascinating industry, and individual companies, and that's vision. And it's absolutely critical that we define where we want to go in order to put in place those steps necessary to get there. It's critical that this industry is successful. Absolutely critical. We all believe in that, right? I mean, I've dedicated my career on climate change issues. This is the technology solution, along with storage, that is going to change radically the world with respect to carbon emissions. And so we have to be successful. And that vision piece of it is something we've always embraced at SEIA. And sometimes it was difficult to really, accept. But at the same point in time, it got the industry unified around that. And I think ultimately, what we did, early days, like 2008, we had this policy summit right after a bill was passed. We had 17 different provisions. And actually, this is before ARA in 2008. And we got everybody together. And there was a lot. There were maybe, 100 people. We were in Arizona. And you remember this, Fred? And we went around. It was a policy summit. And we had everybody identify specifically what was the most transformational thing from a policy perspective that we could do as an industry. We set the goal really high. And people came back with, we had 30 different ones. We put them in buckets. And then we voted. And we said, don't vote for your company. Vote for the industry. Yes. Which one of these policies or groups of policies are going to make the biggest impact? We did this with Arizona State. We did this whole ranking thing, and it was actually pretty fun. And we came back with literally a top 10. And those top 10 priorities became what we focused on as an industry. So it's manufacturing tax credits. It was refundability, but in the form of the Treasury grant program. It was a wide variety of changes to the ITC with respect to make it more acceptable, more usable, allow utilities to use it, those kinds of things. And so, what was great about that was, again, the entire industry coming together and coming to an agreement as to what we were going to do and then how we were going to go about doing it. So having that vision. And one meeting later, we actually got together in D.C. and we put together the slogan for SEIA, which is to build a strong solar industry to power America. So we did it there, and we set the goal of 10 gigawatt annual market. And we are maybe 500 megawatts at that point, maybe 700, something like that. And so we're like, crazy. Do you remember this guy? That was Julie Blunden, right? I'm like, Julie, you're killing me at 10 gigawatt. And so we set that bar and we set a time frame and we beat it. We got to it 2 years, almost 2.5 years earlier than what we anticipated. And so again, it was a little bit of that discipline, but having that vision and making sure that we recognize, yes, this is a technology solution, but these are entrepreneurs who are going to actually realize this, right? These are companies who are going to be putting this in place, and they're going to start small, and then they're going to become huge. And this is what we need to listen to as members is how is their vision fitting into this, and how can we support them? So I think that's part of I think what's successful about the organization, what we've done for years, but also where you've set the goal for 2030, is it 30% solar by 2030? Is having that vision. I think that's fantastic, and let's make sure we hit it and actually beat it by 2 years. Thanks.
Here.
All right, we are going to turn to you, but before we do that, I'm going to give the first question to Tony Clifford, if Tony Clifford would like to ask a question. Tony is a dear friend of SEIA, a longtime board member, and probably the person who brought me to SEIA. We had lunch, and here I am.
Yeah, I was on the search committee when we were looking to replace Rhone. And I nominated Abby, whom I'd known from her days with Governor O'Malley and then with the Maryland Energy Administration. And she took the job. That was it. So, no, that worked out well. I guess that, the only thing that when I'm sitting here listening to these guys, and I started in the solar business, the photovoltaic business, in 1975. So I'm not 50 years, but 49. So I've seen a lot of stuff. And the one thing that I would say is just have fun while you're doing this. I mean, I was thinking back when everyone was speaking about things that I'd done in 1975 to 80. Sklar laughs. Sklar did some stuff with me, that's why. But,
I was sober at the time.
Well, sometimes. Or high, or drunk, or whatever. But, we did things like I provided, we did the solar powering of a couple of concerts by Jackson Browne. Now, solar powering in those days, we powered 1 amp. But we did this on the grounds of the Washington Monument and up in New York. And
we powered the solar reindeer exhibit for the first time during Christmas on the mall. I was so
we did all kinds of crazy stuff.
Solar power for the live reindeer on the mall.
That was it. Wow. One of the things that I was thinking of when they were talking on a more serious note was that the debt that we owed the early environmentalists. I mean, Dennis Hayes, who was the guy that implemented
Sunday.
Earth Day.
And Sunday.
Earth Day and then Sunday. He also started the solar lobby. He was also named the first director of the Solar Energy Research Institute by the then Secretary of Energy, Jim Schlesinger.
Right.
But we had a lot of fun doing this stuff. And, I still occasionally do wine parties at my house for like 8 or 10 people. But we had a lot of parties in those days, too. So I would just say, look, you're in a great industry. You've obviously all drank the Kool-Aid about solar. So just ride it out. Have fun doing it. But you're in a great industry and have fun.
Woo! Thank you, John.
Agreed.
Other questions or reflections on our history?
It's a quiet crowd. What's wrong with it?
There
he is.
Steve Pope has a question right here at the front table. Where Gary's sitting.
All right. So I'd like to get your opinion on how we break into the EV industry. Mm-hmm. Solar on wheels or batteries on wheels is kind of the next big area.
Yeah.
And probably the next big push for our membership should be the auto industry, which is well established, and they've got apparently several different trade organizations that I didn't know and just looked up. So I guess my question to you would be, how do we bring them into the fold? Tesla's certainly here, but there are, every major auto industry, auto manufacturer has placed their bets. Like, that's sunk billions of dollars into this. They know that's where they're headed. So how do we get them into what we're doing?
Well,
because that's the next big step.
I can answer that because I'm getting called by a lot of state governments about that. So about a year ago, we were getting reports that during the super double-digit cold weather in Chicago, the electric vehicles couldn't take the charge. And I get interviewed on the press and go, I doubt it was the electric vehicles. I bet it's the quality of the power coming out of the power lines. I get a call from some senior guy out of the city of Chicago saying, I heard your quote. How do you know that? I go, well, because, I'm doing military charging, near the South Pole. It's working great, so I don't understand. I bet those power lines are not giving enough power. I says, well, how do I prove that? I go, call this guy at the engineering department of University of Chicago, tell him to send some students with these meters, measure some of the power input. I was 100% right. The power input was the frequency was out and it was below the voltage level and the electric chargers couldn't charge it. Hold that thought for 1 second. Virginia Power right here, multi-billion-dollar company, have to wait 2 years to hook up solar to EV chargers. So we as an industry have to come in, and I'm doing some of that right now and guiding the industry, is you put solar with the battery banks right near groups of chargers, and you power the damn chargers. You want a little nighttime power with small wind? Add that in. And we can solve a problem. You need charging now. You can't wait 2 years for a utility company to let you in. So remember, we are a solution set. How this industry has survived is we picked unique, important niche markets and basically controlled the niche markets. I happen to believe personally that is our next big niche market. And we ought to jump on it and drive dollars to it. We've got some bankers in here. I want to talk to them about that. But it's absolutely economic. I've been guiding these projects right now for 3 years. Not one has failed. So you're right. But we have to prove that we will really add value and we'll really scale up.
Yeah.
That's my pitch.
Excellent. All right, one more question? Yeah. Just wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm Brenda Thomas. I'm an independent data science consultant. So my question is, from your 50 years view of the industry, how have you seen the need for operations and maintenance, and both as a capability and also as a business changed over time in the industry?
He's the right person.
Yeah,
Great question. So
His whole company is based on this, by the way.
Exactly. I mean, so 99% of the industry is facing this way, saying we're going to build new solar. And only 1% is looking back and saying there's $2 trillion of solar that's been installed that's rapidly degrading and underperforming, right? KWH just earlier this week came out with their risk assessment report. Last year it showed that on average solar systems are underperforming by 8% compared to their P50 levels. Brutal. I mean, that would be completely unacceptable in any other segment of the energy industry, yet this is the norm in the solar industry, which is absolutely crazy. And in large part, we are not putting the resources to O&M. They have small budgets, you're cutting grass, you're cleaning panels, maybe you're replacing some fuses, that kind of stuff. There's really no comprehensive. We have good monitoring systems many times, but we're just looking at data. We're not actually analyzing that data and turning it into really actionable insights. And so what my company does now, Solarlytics, we actually have a string level optimizer that we install that connects 8 strings into it. It's a DC-DC high power converter that effectively allows us to control the voltage and the current. So if you have string imbalances from shading or temperature or topography or soiling or, a module has burned out or whatever else, we'll correct that voltage so the inverter sees exactly what's happening. So this is new technology in large part to the industry. It's old in the sense of DC-DC high-power converter, but what we're doing is we're making it smart. We combine it with machine learning algorithms, so all that data we collect every 30 seconds goes in the cloud. We then analyze it, so we bring it back to the O&M provider so we can say, hey, specifically, on this string, you've got diodes that are failing, or you've got soiling issues, or it's not.
How about space aliens?
You have space?
No, okay.
Not yet. The algorithm's not that sophisticated yet. We're working on it.
Thank you.
But the point is that nobody is dedicating the budget to it, and or very few are. And what's fascinating about it is these older systems have really high power purchase agreement rates, right? These old stuff are 8 cents, 12 cents, 16 cents on summer days or higher. And companies are finding that they're getting a better return on improving those older performing assets than they are from building new ones. So we're just starting to wake up as an industry that this is a big issue. And frankly, if we're going to hit our state RPS goals, we need to make sure all of the generation, solar, wind, and everything else, continues to operate to the greatest level possible.
And 15% of the calls I get as an owner's rep guy is from the end user, right? The owner who's receiving the power, sometimes who invests in the power, saying it's not operating. And they don't call me because of my beard. It hurts my feelings. They call me because they're in a jam. And they don't have the understanding and the overview to understand when animals have chewed out some of their panels, or as we just talked, something's growing underneath the panels and poking through, or they're heating up and you're going to get a fire in it like Walmart had on 5 of their stores. So this is a big issue we have to confront as an industry. Rhone's in a great position to help with that, but it's across the board. Better training, both of the financial side, the owner side, and the industry side on how you look at that problem. And we got to deal with it now because it's going to bite us in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, and just to build on that real quick, I'm sorry, Fred.
What a question you asked.
Is
Look
the
at
audience, the audience for this, this discussion are the investors, right, or the off-takers. And the investors are increasingly frustrated. We see that all the time. There's studies that show that there's a 70% chance that a lot of these projects will default because their underperformance is so great. And so the investors aren't getting the returns that they were hoping for. So we as an industry got to get our shit together and make sure we're not in a position where all of a sudden, the investors in the world say, you know what, I got better options. We're going to do standalone storage, or we're going to do some of these other things instead of putting our money into solar because it's just too important. Absolutely. So it is critical. I mean, it's a SEIA goal. It should be a SEIA opportunity to say, hey, O&M, we're looking forward. Let's make sure we're taking care of it in the back.
All right, Fred, what you got?
Let me bring you back 50 years. With the solar water heating industry. Mm-hmm. And the cartoon of the husband and wife looking up on the roof, and there's a man or a woman installing the solar water heater, and the wife or the husband says to the other, wasn't that the plumber who couldn't fix our leaking faucet? Now, that industry, too, had a problem. It needed codes and standards. the industry, there was corrosion in those water heaters. There was ice sheets would form on the roof, and it could slide off and kill somebody.
When that happens.
I know. And in those days, the industry was angry. They said, you're hurting our market. SEIA has to continue to press for reliable products that the consumers use with codes and standards. What Rhone is doing is crucial. These systems have to work, period.
50 years from now, when people who are not us are celebrating the 100th anniversary of SEIA, what's it going to look like?
Solar, geothermal, wind, storage will be the dominant energy source. Fossil fuels will be history. They will not be burned anymore. The wars will continue. The climate change will continue. The pandemics will continue because I think human beings just are unwilling to get it. SEIA, I think, is going to have to, even though they'll be the dominant energy source, they're still going to have to meet the needs of the industry, and I think the challenges are going to continue. So I think you'll just have a different set of challenges, but I see solar as being the dominant energy source. By the way, in 1974, we said that we can do 20% of the electricity market by 2020, so not too different from your 30 by 30.
So I'm going to build what Fred said, but in a very different way. I want you to remember about cell phones that I was laughed at when I had the first one that looked like the size of a wine bottle with a 30-pound battery and 3 cell towers. In Washington, people would say cell towers will never, cellular will never happen. Too expensive, ridiculous. So now everybody carries a computer more than the Pentagon had in memory back then. And now the internet is intrinsic to those cell phones and to our society. And I am here to tell you that solar, storage, and all the other renewables, smart sensors, analytics, control, AI, blockchain, all of that, will be integrated in ways that we as a society will not even notice. That the coatings on the south side of buildings and the shingles on buildings and the pavement all will be solar material. And I'm doing work with that right now. And batteries will be in everything, buildings, everything, just everything, including all our infrastructure, which is my base of my business. And it will be intrinsic of the communications, the information industry, the internet, the energy, healthcare, air quality in buildings, everything we do. We will be evolved into being an intrinsic industry to our society, to our materials, to our buildings, to our industry. And that's where we're going. And that's what we're trying to leapfrog to. And it's exceedingly exciting. And the amount of materials we'll do it will be less by fourfold. And everything pretty much will be recycled that we produce. And it will be a very, very different world, almost unimaginable from when we all started in the 70s looking at this stuff, and it was clunky and basically not commercialized.
Yeah, all right. How many years are we going out? Another 50. Well, Scott Sklar will be on his 4th term as executive director / CEO here, which will be great, no question about it. And I agree with what Scott said on the technology sense. The beautiful thing about solar is we're infinitely scalable, right? From a little tiny cell on a watch all the way up to multi-gigawatt solar plants in the desert. And everything in between, and that's just today where we're mass producing these solar panels, which are great as a commodity, but we're really just starting to see where it can be applied. That's more effective in stabilizing the grid and ultimately the new technologies that are going to integrate it into our life, as Scott said. So it's not on a rooftop or it's not a big field in the desert. It's ubiquitous. Yeah. It's everywhere. It is on those roads. It is in the sidewalks. It is on the walls of the buildings and every place else. And here's the one slight caveat. I know, and I really wish we could. We always say everything could be generated by solar. And it's true. It probably could. But the truth of the matter is that's not what's going to happen. We're always going to have a balance of different energy technologies that are going to merge. As much as I don't like saying this, we're going to see new nuclear power. It's going to be smaller. It's going to be more regional, but that's going to be a massive technology advancement from a central station perspective. New storage technologies are going to continue to evolve. So I think from, kind of the SEIA perspective, we're going to be on number 75 of RE+, and everything is going to be, kind of growing and fantastic. We're going to be a mature industry, but the technology advancements are going to be so radical and so different that we have to be embracing them and we have to be out ahead of them. And as much as possible, make sure that they're manufactured here in the United States. Thanks.
Amen. Amen.